Gary Bobrovitz is our keynote speaker tonight. He's over there sitting next to Faoud, and he's going to be talking about his story with prostate cancer. He was diagnosed 4 years earlier than I, and his medical history is pretty much the same as mine, or mine's the same as his. He's produced a 1-hour documentary on living with prostate cancer that was given a gold medal by the Canadian Association of Broadcast National Gold Medal Award, and also aired on the Global Television Network. He's now Director of Communications with the Alberta Liberal Party, and he's a power lifter, weightlifter, and holds more than 15 world records in 2 weight classes. And I'm told that just this week, or last week, Gary?
December.
Oh, December, okay. In December, he broke a world record on powerlifting. So if you'll welcome Gary, he's going to tell us about his story with prostate cancer.
You know, it was December, because if it was last week when I broke the record, I wouldn't be here today. I'd still be laying in bed trying to recover, you see. So it's quite a strenuous undertaking. Actually, that was in Orlando, Florida, where the weather was beautiful. And we had a big storm here in Calgary. And I lifted 2 different days, so you have to keep your weight at a certain level, not eat, which is very difficult, and then recover in time to lift again. So it's all business when we go down there. People think that you go down for, like I've traveled all over the world, that, you get to see this and then, nah, you're all focused on what you have to do there. So anyways, thank you very much for everyone for being here this evening. It's a rather chilly evening, so we have a lot of courage in being out here today. I'll tell you briefly about myself. I met Kelly and David last summer, and I had done some work for the Prostate Institute prior to that, but I built a relationship with them, and that's why I'm here today. So, you know who my name is, Gary Bobrovitz. I was born in Ontario. I came to Alberta in the spring of '78. So I consider myself as close to a natural Albertan as you can possibly get, because everybody else pretty much came after, right? And that 3rd or 4th or 5th wave of individuals who are looking for economic opportunities and a better life in this province. I think I was here for the second oil boom. The first one was 1971, and it sagged back down. Then around 77, it started up again. So I remember when I first arrived, I was working for CTV News in Ontario, and never been to Alberta. And I remember driving from Saskatchewan. I was like, Jesus, you can see for like 100 miles. Like in Ontario, you can see like 4 blocks. It's so dense, right? And I remember that I was hired by CFAC TV and radio. Ed Whalen was the news director. And when we were just crossed from Manitoba into Saskatchewan in the evening, I could hear the music and the disc jockey on CFAC. And I was like, that's the station I'm coming to work at. And it's like 2,000 miles away. It was kind of impressive. Anyway, so I came to Alberta in the spring of '78, worked at CFAC. We were eventually purchased. That was News First, if everybody can remember the famous song. Makes no difference where I go, you're the best hometown I know. That was one of the greatest promotions in the history of broadcasting, and we got huge play on that for years and years and years and years. And it was a company out of St. Louis, and we bought that promotion only to find out that they sold it to a whole bunch of other cities in the United States, and they would just change the name of the town, like, it makes no difference where I go, Houston, you're the best place I know, and blah, 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 blah. But anyways, and so eventually we were purchased by Global Television, and I had 41 years in total, which I think is kind of a record. I guess I'm into all those numbers, and I just retired in the late spring of 2018, rather. The station threw me a wonderful going away party and gave me a cell phone as a present. Sorry, not a going away party, a recognition of my 40 years, which was very generous of them, and gave me this cell phone as a memento. So about 3 days after the party, I get a phone call from the Alberta Liberals because my girlfriend worked for them. And they said, hey, well, now that you've got 40 years, like, you thinking about changing careers? And I said, no, because I was still the senior reporter there and got all the great stories, and they relied on me and I enjoyed my work. About 2 days after that, the network offered separation packages. And I was like, well, this is too good to be true, right? So I looked at that package, and because I had so many years, it was quite lucrative, and accepted the Liberal offer. But the funniest part was this was about a week after they'd thrown me this nice party, cake and all that. And I went to the general manager and I said, look, I've got another offer. Do you mind if I'm going to take it, I think. So I'll have to give you my notice. And he said, well, this was a Tuesday evening. And he said, well, when are you going to work there? So I said, I think it's pretty soon. I called the Liberals. They said, can it be Thursday morning? So I had to tell them, I got to leave in 24 hours. Can you just, forward my paycheck and let me out early? So they did, and which was very nice of them. And I went right to the legislature and worked on the throne speech day. And because I covered politics for 40 years, I was pretty familiar with it. So I've been with the Liberals now for 9-10 months. And as you all know, we're heading into a provincial election campaign. So we've been extremely busy traveling the province and debating with the other politicians and engaging with them on social media. And we just put out a news release today. The ND, and this is my expertise, so this is why they hired me. And I was always pretty aggressive as a reporter, but I was, never unfair. I was never, nasty. But if you did something wrong and I was after you, look out. So anyways, today we find out that the NDP government, in conjunction with the UCP in a committee which they dominate because they have the most number of seats, have voted to cut by 60% the funding to the smaller parties. That's the Alberta Party, the Liberal Party, Derek Fildebrandt's Independence Party, by 50%. We're like they're saving maybe, $500,000. Then they gave themselves a pay increase from the money that they cut from us. So I wrote this very cutting and critical news release. Actually, that's what I was looking at on my phone because we're still getting media requests to do interviews on it. So I called them the Gang of Two, a takeoff on the Gang of Four when Mao Zedong was having his power struggles in China. So we're saying that, this sort of tactic to limit the voices of Albertans and to not provide you as many choices and options in a democracy is something that you do in a tin pot dictatorship, not in Canada, right? So I guess they must be afraid of us. Otherwise, why would they bother doing that? I guess they want to win all the seats. But then the irony of it is when the NDP had 2 seats, Rachel Notley and Brian Mason, which was prior to the 2015 election, they got full funding as a party that didn't get official status in the legislature. You need 4 MLAs to qualify for the full funding package. They only had 2, but the PC government, say what you will about them, gave them full funding. The NDP get into office and they ripped the funding off for parties that were of the same size as them once they achieve power. And I'm not trying to make this a political statement, but I found that a little ironic, so I wanted to put out a social media tweet. You were at 2, you went to 54, God help you go back to 2 because you're not going to like your own legislation. Anyways, so it's been fairly vigorous, and It's been quite. I'll talk about politics for a minute if you don't mind, because it's on my mind, because that's what I've been doing all day today. But I think it's going to be a fairly aggressive campaign, and we do a lot of polling. We just met with our pollsters yesterday, and it's interesting information. But you can expect a pretty aggressive campaign, I think. My feeling, though, is from the polling that we've done, and we have proprietary polling at Global, where I still have kind of a backdoor relationship, and a lot of Albertans don't like negative advertising, and I might just ask your opinions about that once I tell you the rest of this information. So let's get to the interesting stuff. As Kelly and David mentioned, I was in competitive powerlifter, and in the winter, in the December of 2001, I won my first World Championships in Las Vegas. I was quite happy, came back. And it's a pretty physically demanding event, and it takes weeks and weeks to get over it. I was just mentioning to Dave, my best friend is, what's the painkiller I was just telling you about? Ibuprofen. I had to switch. I had to switch to Aleve because I had built up a tolerance to the other one. So what happened was that I went for my annual checkup, and all happy about my recent victory, and trying to learn how to walk again because I was all banged up. And my doctor ran all the tests. Yeah, this, that, fine. Nothing. And about 2 weeks later, he phones me up. Said, hey, can you come back in again? I want to talk to you. I thought, sure. I go back. And he's an East Indian fellow who actually I met when I went to the University of Western Ontario in London back in the 70s. He was on campus as a contract physician for the students' union. Lo and behold, I end up in Calgary. He ends up in Calgary. His name is Dr. Adatia, great guy. So I hooked up with him again. So he calls me in, says, yeah, he's very circumspect in his comments, right? And he said, yeah, looking at your blood test. I said, oh, is my cholesterol up or something? I don't know. No, that's good. Blood pressure, yeah, no, that's good. But your PSA is elevated. And I literally did not know what he was talking about. I had never been for a prostate test. So I asked him, well, what the hell's PSA? He said, those are your prostate enzymes. And they're elevated. I said, well, what does that mean? Well, I'm not sure, but I'm going to send you to the urologist. So as soon as he mentioned the word urologist, I knew that he wasn't being exactly forthcoming. And sure enough, I had to go to see my urologist, and he sent Dr. Adatia a report. Dr. Adatia called me back, ironically, on my birthday. Now, that's one of the protocols, is to get tested on your birthday. I think I blazed the trail for that, except I did it in reverse. He called me in on my birthday and said that I would have to go for a biopsy because I had elevated PSA count, and I was 49, just celebrated my 50th birthday on that day. It was in January the 18th. So, fine. I go to the clinic on Glenmore Trail, and I remember sitting for those of you who've been there, you'll understand, sitting in the waiting room, and we're wearing this, crappy little paper gown, right? Kind of trying to, not make eye contact with anybody else, kind of reading National Geographic, and the testing is being conducted in a room to the side with the door closed. And you can sort of hear this buzzing sound. It's like, boom, boom. Everyone's looking around. No one knows what the hell it is. And the lights were flickering a couple of times. I thought, that's weird. Didn't they pay their electricity bill? So I remember the door opened, and this fellow, maybe 65, came out walking very slowly, kind of shuffling his feet, and he had his head down. You see, everybody's looking at him. Everybody goes back to their book and doesn't look at him again. And then they called me in. I was like, oh, Christ. Go inside, and I forget the fellow's name. He had a beard, a Jewish doctor, nice guy. And he had his assistant there, and so he recognized me from television, starts chatting me up, fine, lay down, blah, blah, blah. He's talking away. He says, like, just sort of, here, I'm going to just tell you briefly what I'm going to do, and I'm going to take this tube, which has a camera, a snips, and a light, and I'm going to put it up here behind. I was like, oh, is there no other way to do this? He said, no, this is the only way. So while he's talking to me, he's asking me all these questions about Ralph Klein, who was premier because I was a political reporter, talking a mile a minute, and all of a sudden, bang, the first one hit me, and I was like, oh my God. So I sort of turned and I said, are you done? He goes, no, there's 8 more, because they needed 9 tissue samples altogether. And that was probably the worst experience, I thought, in this prostate journey, only to find out, to discover after that there was other challenges. So very uncomfortable. I know a famous lawyer in Calgary. He was about 10 years older than me. One time we were chatting, and he mentioned he had an appointment for the same procedure. And I said, oh, geez, yeah, I'll tell you, I'll prepare you for it. He goes, no, I've already had 2. I said, this is your 3rd one? He said, yeah, and he still can't determine if I'm eligible, if I, cross the line sufficiently in terms of the tissue sample, whether I should have an operation. I said, well, who cares about the operation? 3 of those tests are worse than any operation you're going to have. And to this day, he has still not received any treatment. Poor guy. So shortly thereafter, I got a call from the urologist, came in, and it was Brian Donnelly. Wonderful man and excellent surgeon, thank God. And he laid out all my options: prostatectomy, freezing, radiation, brachytherapy. I thought about it. Didn't make up my mind. Went back. And when I told my employer, well, I've got prostate cancer and I'm going to have an operation, I'll need time off work, he, at the time that had happened, Katie Couric of NBC News had breast cancer, and she decided to go public with her issue. And they said, this is a story that a lot of people want to hear about. Men aren't very aware of their own health situation. And if you do a good job and you live, just think of the ratings. Cold calculated. So I said, well, I thought about it. And while I was doing the research, waiting for my potential surgery, because Dr. Donnelly had booked me for June 30th. No, sorry, September 30th. And this was February. I had to wait in line. Fine, I was in no rush. And during my research for the documentary that I eventually saw, that if you want to review, is in the archives there at the Institute. I don't know if you've taken over some of those videos or...
No, I looked for it.
Yeah, no? Wow. A lot of people have seen it, yeah. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, it turned out to be very interesting, and I did win a national award, Alberta and Western Canada, then the national award called Living with Prostate Cancer. And I communicated with a doctor in Arizona who had pioneered what he said was a unique new strategy back in 2002. And that was an adaptation of the brachytherapy. And when he heard that I was doing this documentary, he immediately contacted me and said, well, if you put me in the documentary, I'm thinking about expanding my practice to Canada and Western Canada, because in those days the facilities were pretty limited. And he said, if you do that, I'll fly you down to Arizona and I'll do the procedure on you free of charge. So you help me, I'll help you. And he sold me in all the advantages, et cetera, et cetera. So somehow I mentioned it to someone who was friends with the nurse in Dr. Donnelly's office. Then I get a phone call from Donnelly's office saying, oh, there's an emergency, can you please come in? I'm thinking, oh, Jesus, maybe they postponed my surgery or something. I was very concerned. I walk in, and if you've ever met Dr. Donnelly, he's 6'7", very tall. I'm 5'5". He walks in and he says, just sit down over here. And he had the chair like in the corner, which I thought was a weird place to put it. So I sit down. He walks right and stands right over top of me and says, what's this I hear you're going to go to Arizona? I was like, how did you hear about that? He said, I have my sources. And then he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, well, you have a daughter, don't you? And she was about 13 years old. I said, yes, I do. And a son who was younger. He said, well, do you want to dance with your daughter at her wedding? I said, yes, I do. He said, I thought so. I'm booking you in for surgery tomorrow morning. And he just got up and walked out of the room and slammed the door. So I thought about that for a while. It was quite an emotional interaction that I had with him. And when I walked out, his nurse, I remember she was like, she was just shaking her head. She said, tomorrow, 7 a.m., Rocky View Hospital. So he bumped me up in the lineup. And probably it was the wisest thing that I ever did was to accept that invitation, shall I say. What happened was that after, and I had the operation, we videotaped it. Dr. Donnelly was great. He, I didn't know this until after I came out of the operation, and my cameraman talked to me the next day, but when they pulled out my prostate, which you'll see in the video, Donnelly holds it up for the camera to look at. And the nurse was standing beside the camera with sort of like a cup, a container, and he kind of tosses it to her, and she catches it in the container. Like it was like the highlight of the video, right? So he had an incredibly good sense of humor, and I think he said to the camera, "Measure twice, cut once." So he's a great guy, and it actually was very fortunate that I accepted that procedure. We all know that, and he explained it to me. Well, he didn't give me any explanation. He just ran me in there that, when you're subject to a radical prostatectomy, that there are unintended consequences, including, incontinence and impotence. And when I came out of it, he came to my room. He said, "Oh, I don't know. Did I tell you about this? Yeah, you got like a 35% chance of being incontinent and about a 50% chance of being impotent." I'm like, well, I'm glad you didn't tell me before. And he said, yeah, and I tried my best, but I can't make any guarantees. And in those days, the technology was like the full frontal cut. Or as Dr. Donnelly said, it's like a, what do you call it? A cesarean section, except no baby comes out. And he had these goggles with this magnifying glass. At the time, it was the most advanced technology. Now, you've got the small incisions, you've got the computer and all that, and the robotic operation. So I just missed it by, 5 years, I guess. If God would have waited and gave it to me in 2007, I would have been okay. But I remember I still have the scar, and Yeah, it was quite an interesting experience. I guess I don't know how else to put it. It took me a long time to recover, and of course, as you all know, you have to wear a catheter for a while, but I thought it'd be like 3, 4, 5 days, and it was like 6 weeks. I don't have to remind everybody the removal of the catheter is worse than the insertion because, of course, you're knocked out when they stick it in. And I remember when I called to book an appointment for the removal, they said, oh, like we're really busy. Can't you just get your wife to take it out? I'm like, well, yeah, that's what I said. What? He said, yeah, it's easy. Yeah, just put her on the phone. We'll explain it to her. So they put her on the phone. She explained to me. I said, yeah, no, let's just hold off on that for a little bit. But eventually it did work that way. And, sitting in a tub of hot water for like about an hour, right? But it didn't make it any less unpleasant. But of course, you guys all know about that. I don't want to bring back horrible memories, but this is kind of a catharsis that I'm going through here right now. So, I waited, and I had some incontinence issues. And even to this day, by the way, sorry, I forgot to mention, he said, you're such a great guy. While you were knocked out, I reconfigured your bladder. It's a little smaller, about half the capacity. And he said, because you're such a celebrity, I gave you a free vasectomy, and I'm not even going to charge you for it. I said, oh, well, thank you, Dr. Donnelly. Cleaned me right out. He says, oh, yeah, might as well do it all in one fell swoop. So I had that going for me, too. And made the slow recovery, as we all have. I was in no rush. And my body was in no rush. I was, even though I was 50 years old, relatively young. I'm telling you this story out of order because I'm just remembering things that I blocked out of my memory. But when I was in the hospital, I remember they wake you up periodically to provide you medication and pain therapy. And one of the night nurses came in and kicked my catheter bag by accident. And the vibration goes through the bag, up the bed, into you, and you wake up real quick. And she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Did I wake you up? I'm like, no, I'll be okay. And my breath comes back. And I met a couple of fellows on the ward there in Rocky View. There was 3 of us. And I was the youngest. And we sort of had a bit of a bond there, but I haven't. One of them worked in High River. I remember he was a finance guy. Another guy was an insurance adjuster. But one of the nurses came in to me one evening and said, do you mind if I talk to you a little bit about your situation? I thought it was part of the therapy, but it was absolutely ad hoc by her. And now this was a registered nurse, the night nurse. And I was ignorant about prostate cancer other than the education that Dr. Donnelly provided me on it. And she sat down, was quite concerned, and pulled the chair right up and said, my husband has prostate cancer. I said, oh, are you sure? Did you take all the tests? Yes. This is a nurse, right? She said, we don't know what to do, and there's all these options, and I think we're just going to adopt a wait-and-see attitude. I said, well, I'm not sure I would recommend that. How old is your husband? 36. And I just looked at this poor woman, and I didn't have the heart to tell her what I had been told by Dr. Donnelly in terms of the age demographic and contracting the disease and the likely outcome. That stuck in my memory. Another one was a person that lived on my block. I lived in Mission in downtown Calgary behind Western Canada High School. He was a naturopath practitioner, and he contracted prostate cancer. And he thought that if he ingested dandelion tea and took herbal remedies and adopted this wait-and-see approach, wait and watch, I think it's called, that somehow miraculously everything would be fine. And his metastasized and he died. Another sort of sad story was a very good friend of mine who convinced me to not take brachytherapy, but to accept the surgery, was a very wealthy stockbroker in Calgary. He also got me involved with the Prostate Institute. And what happened to him was that he got brachytherapy and he was going on a vacation to Hawaii, and he was at the Calgary airport waiting to board his flight. And he went to pick up his suitcase and he collapsed. And it turned out the cancer cells had metastasized to his spine and basically ate away the bone, and he fractured his spine. And he next phoned me a couple weeks later. He was in the Rosedale hospice. And he died too. And he convinced me to accept surgery, and he told me, do not do or make the choice that I made. So his name was Vic Rogers, and I owe a lot to him. And when I visited him, he looked like hell. He looked like a hockey stick. He was that thin, and it just ate him away, and he died. And he had a lot of money. And another fellow who had a lot of money was Brett Wilson, who I also met at a fundraiser at Cowboys. And I knew a little bit about him because this was before he became super rich and famous. His daughter and my daughter went to school together in Lower Mount Royal. And I'd been to his fabulous house a few times. And I saw him at this Cowboys function. He's like, well, what are you doing here? I said, well, I got prostate cancer. What are you doing here? He said, well, so do I. And he's a few years younger than me. And we started to commiserate, and he was also involved in the Prostate Institute. And actually, he's one guy that I think was instrumental in really moving forward the knowledge about this illness, and put his money where his mouth is, and funded the facility with Doc Seaman. And I remember in that group, in my contemporary group of that period when we all were struggling with prostate cancer, there was him. There was Clive Beddoe, who was a major shareholder in WestJet. There was Alderman John Schmall. There was Preston Manning and myself, and they used our images in some promotions. These are prominent Calgarians who have this issue, and they're willing to give back to the community. One of the reasons why I did decide to proceed with the documentary is because I felt I owed an obligation to the community, because I had made my livelihood here, and it was a very successful career, and I enjoyed Calgary, that I felt a public responsibility to give back to the community. The other issue was that I was shocked at how ignorant men were about their personal health issues, me being a primary candidate for that title. And I always thought it was a disease that my father or my grandfather would contract and die from, but never me, because I wasn't old enough. And then I met that nurse who had a very young husband. And I don't know whatever happened to the two of them. I hope he, made a successful recovery eventually. So that also put me in touch with a larger circle of people in the prostate network. It was a bit of an emotional catharsis for me, and I knew that I was doing the right thing. And luckily, I won an award, but I could care less about that. I wanted to be able to inform people. And just because of my profile in the community, being on television, dozens and dozens and dozens, and I'm not exaggerating, maybe hundreds, I have no idea, of men told me after they either heard about my situation or saw my documentary that they went and got tested. Never had been tested before in their life. And then the whole marketing initiative took off on prostate cancer, having yourself checked on your birthday, trying to keep up with women who, have pushed the envelope on their efforts to try and educate other women on breast cancer. I mean, we have a lot to learn from our better halves. I mean, they're tougher than we'll ever be, if you ask me, and a lot smarter, because they've made far more advances. But now with people like David and Kelly in this organization, we're sort of catching up, but we still have a long way to go. So we could learn a lot from them, definitely. After part of my documentary was not only my surgery and then some discussion about the options and how men can be more aware and the things to look for, et cetera, et cetera. I was somehow got it in my head that I was going to go back to the World Championships in Las Vegas in December of that year, after I won in December of 2001. And I remember friends of mine bringing weights to my house while my kids were, doing their homework, and my wife was not very happy that these big burly dudes, all tattooed, were bringing these weights to my house because I wanted to lift, but I couldn't really move, and spent a lot of time on the couch. And it just goes to show you, who your true friends are. And when I went back to the gym, they really supported me, and they spotted me and they helped me. And as I started to get stronger, I made up my mind that I was going to go back, no matter what. I thought if I went back, I would make a nice closing of the circle for this documentary to show that just because you have prostate cancer, no matter what treatment you subscribe to, life carries on. And I went back. The station financed the whole thing. And the guy that I went with was a fellow that I lifted a couple of times casually. And he was a great big guy. He's about 6'3", about 230. Nice guy. Corey was his name. And he was a very creative photographer and shot a beautiful documentary. And I'll be damned if I didn't win. But I really wanted to win. And even though I was, somewhat lacking in confidence, knowing where my strength threshold was, you never know what you can accomplish unless you actually go and take that step. And I think that's sort of an analogy that I can draw for all of us who aren't weightlifters but who go through prostate cancer. You don't have to go to the World Championships, and I didn't care if I won, but I wanted to be there. It validates you no matter what options you take in your life. The key, I think, is to keep on fighting. Incremental baby steps, it all adds up. One day you'll look back and go, geez, that wasn't so bad after all, but it's a lengthy journey. Now, I had a lot of people that helped me along the way, and one of them was a man who was, and I can't remember the correct program, but it's like the buddy system, where if you're an incoming rookie, they hooked you up with someone who already had gone through the process and would explain everything to you. And his name was Jim, and he was an art teacher, retired art teacher. His wife had died of liver cancer, and he devoted his retirement years to giving back to the community and helping other men. And I saw him. He came to my recovery room in the hospital the day after I had the operation. I didn't know that he was coming. He just showed up and sat down, pulled up his chair, and told me this is going to happen, and then this and this and this. And I'm like, how does he, are you sure? Yeah, don't worry, it'll all be fine. I thought he was just blowing smoke up my butt. I hate to use that expression in this particular case, but He did give me a lot of assurance, and he gave me the psychological stability and the hope that it would be better. But actually, he didn't know. He was just playing on the probability factor. I did have some incontinence issues early on, and now, because my bladder is small, if I drink, a large glass of water, like I'm full and I have to urinate. And when you're squatting, let's say the world record, which is 425 that I have, the weight exerts all this pressure on your body. And I remember Dr. Donnelly saying, now look, these stitches, they're good to go, but I mean, don't start doing all this heavy weight early on. I'm warning you because, and I could have suffered some internal damage too. And he goes, then I'll have to cut you open and we'll have to start all over again. I remember him telling me that. So yeah, there are some, unintended consequences, but then you just put up with it, right? I just run to the bathroom right before I go to lift, right? So no matter where I am in the world, Portugal or Finland or whatever, I always look to see where the washroom is, right? Well, we have this equipment that we wear, but once you put it on, you can't take it off. So you got to really be proactive and schedule everything exactly. And then I can't drink. They're like, here, no, sorry, it's okay, because I can't get out of my suit. But I remember when I won back in that December of 2002, it was about 800 lifters, and for my age and weight category, and my cameraman told the host organizer about my situation, and unbeknownst to me, when I went up to get my trophy, he announced it was in the casino. I'll be damned if I can remember the name. Riviera Casino. And there's about, 500-600 people there, right? And he announced that I was a prostate cancer survivor, although, months, and I'd gone through this surgery. And so people gave me a bit of a standing ovation, and I was really gratified. I wasn't expecting that at all. But that whole episode really set me on the track to recovery and to helping others and to really blossom my powerlifting career. I never looked back, and I needed it to validate myself. And then after I won, I'm like, nothing's going to stop me now. And I just kept training and winning. And now my biggest issue is, being sore all the time, right? We go for a walk with my girlfriend. She's walking she's very small and thin, right? I'm like, slow down. I'm going to need a walker to go after you because my hips are sore, everything. I'm like a grumpy old man now. I'm 67 now, so I just turned 67. But never give up. And I mentioned Jim, and he was a sweet fellow. I never saw him again after the post-operation period when he came, and met with me and tried to console me, and then I went to the institute and he gave me some books on sex and incontinence. And I remember him also telling me on the day after, he says, now I know you had a prostatectomy, and you got a 50%. You got a 50% chance of recovery. So he said, you're going in a guy, you might come out a girl, but don't worry. I'm like, don't worry. Like, what are you talking? What do you mean? He said, no, it's always better after. Don't worry. And I thought, this guy's crazy. And he's just trying to trick me. And ultimately, eventually, I recovered a full sexual function, thank God. And I remember I called Dr. Donnelly's office, thanking him for that. But it took a long time, and people think, oh yeah, sex. I'm like, that's the last thing I was thinking about. I just wanted to get this, goddamn catheter out of me, and hope that I could walk properly and put some weight back on. And my abdomen was very messed up, obviously. And in powerlifting, your core abdomen is the most important thing. And I do a lot of ab work even to this very day. And I don't know, maybe it made me stronger. It took out all the fat or something. I don't know. But getting back to Jim for a minute, he, about 4 years later, after I'd done quite a bit of work with the Prostate Institute, they had a golf tournament. And I went to that. And because I had lifted and I was getting stronger, even though I wasn't a great player, they gave me a 36 handicap, which is like the crappiest. That's the most handicap you can have. And I got lucky and I won the tournament, and they were so pissed off. You got a 36 handicap? Look at all the stuff that you won, right? So I gave it back because I felt bad, but I didn't know. And at that tournament, I met Jim again. And he was sick, and he had a recurrence of his cancer. And he's the other guy that I'll never forget, because I made him stand up in this crowd of maybe 200 men, and I thanked him for what he did for me. And he died about 3 or 4 months after that. And I don't know where I would have been without him, but he was really instrumental in my recovery. And so I felt obligated to sort of carry on his legacy if I could, which is why I'm involving myself in this organization now in any way that I can. Mind you, another interesting story is at the gym that I worked out, which is called BJ's Gym, which was the bad gym in Calgary. It was full of Hells Angels and police officers, and we all lifted together. And the Hart Wrestling family was also lifting and using that facility because the owner of the gym married into the Hart family, and so I got to know all of them. And the guy who hired me at CFAC, Ed Whalen, was the announcer for Stampede Wrestling, and he was famous the world over for that. So we all grew up there and had children, and enjoyed a lot of positive experiences, including some negative ones, because Owen Hart, who was one of the Hart wrestlers, and he had 2 children, and when I would babysit when my wife worked on a Saturday, I had to promise I wouldn't go to the gym. I never kept that promise. I would bundle my kids up in the car, and I learned all that you roll the windows down, right? And then you drive the car, and then like knocked out in the back seat. They were maybe 3 or 4 years old. And Owen had children, and so we would bring them into the gym, and they would play on the wrestling ring while we lifted. And eventually, he was a wonderful guy. He was tragically killed in Kansas City when he was performing a stunt on the roof of the Kaiser Arena, and he fell to his death. And that was a very, very sad day. And then a few of the other wrestlers ended up dying of one malady or another. And some of the Hells Angels got shot. A couple of the police officers were injured on the job. But we had this tight group, and one of them was Bret Hart, who I've known since the day I came to Calgary. And then lo and behold, a couple of years ago, I see this announcement: Bret's got prostate cancer. I'm like, well, join the club. We were at another gym in Marda-Loop, him and myself and another guy named Roy, who was a Canadian national bodybuilding champion. And we're all graduates of BJ's Gym because they tore it down. So there's a picture of Bret, myself, and Roy giving the fist sign saying, hey, the 80s called, and we hung up the phone because we're kind of throwbacks to that era in the 2000s, right? But we still kept on lifting because it keeps you young and it keeps you going. And I just bumped into Bret Hart at Bret Wilson's function this summer, and we exchanged, tall stories back and forth. And I'm glad to see that he's become involved in this organization and is giving freely of his time. And I saw there was one promotion you had, the 2 Brets, right?
That's not us, that's the center.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was the Prostate Institute Center, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, but I was giving him the gears. I said to Bret Hart, but I knew Bret Wilson when he had prostate cancer 10 years ago, man. You're coming late to the party, right? But it was quite interesting. So there we are. There was Bret Hart, Brett Wilson, Gary Bobrovitz. We all had prostate cancer. We're all drinking beer at his garden party. We're like, geez, 6 degrees of separation. And who knows how many other individuals. I know that people think that they know me, obviously, because I've been on TV for so long. And that's wonderful, you know, and I'm very open to any of them. And when a guy comes to me and I see him looking, I can tell now over time by the look in his face if he's going to talk to me about weightlifting or a news story or the fact that he has prostate cancer. I can tell just by looking at his face. And I don't know how many phone calls I received, hundreds of phone calls. Hi, it's Bill. Hi, Gary. Hi. Who's this? Bill. I'm like, Bill who? But I don't say Bill who. Yeah, how's it going? Good. Hey, you got a couple of minutes? Can I ask you some questions about prostate cancer? And I always tell them the unvarnished truth. And I make sure that they know that there's nothing to fear but fear itself. And listen to the advice of your doctor and don't get hung up on all these options and second guessing and reading material that might want to dissuade you from taking a decision that you think will have unintended consequences. Because one of those unintended consequences might be to save your life. And you're going to have to make a decision on some of those choices. But like Dr. Donnelly told me, if you want to dance with your daughter at her wedding, you better get this surgery. So I'm quite blunt with them. I still try to be polite and I try to be encouraging, but I don't bullshit them in any way because I think that's doing them a disservice and they want to hear the truth. And I tell them, like, you necessarily may have blown much of this out of proportion. There are certain medical factors for some of these treatments, and if it's surgery, so be it, especially if you're a candidate for that procedure in this day and age, unlike myself and all the others who, blaze the trail for everybody else. It's a lot more efficient and highly technical, and your recovery opportunities and probabilities are exponentially higher than they were when I went through. And Dr. Donnelly said, yeah, you're lucky, because I like Irish whiskey, that I didn't take a couple of nips before I went into the surgical suite, because who knows if I could see right or not. I'm like, oh, thank you very much, yes. He's a great guy. And actually, speaking of Dr. Donnelly, sorry I'm all over the place here, but shortly after it was, so I went in the spring, and in September, I had an appointment with him, one of the follow-ups, to see what where my PSA levels were. And the nurse called me and said, we have to reschedule your appointment, or we'll send you to another urologist. It makes no difference. I said, okay, well, rescheduled to when? And she said, oh, the spring. And I thought, that's weird. That's like 5 or 6 months from now. You needed the 3-month checkups, right? And she said, well, Dr. Donnelly's going to be out of commission for a while. And as it turned out, the foremost, I think, in my opinion, urologist and surgeon for this procedure himself contracted prostate cancer. And they say when you go into a barber shop, you don't go to the barber that's got the best haircut. You ask him who cut his hair. And I remember Donnelly saying to me, I think I'm the best surgeon, but I'm going to Metcalf. So if you want Dr. Metcalf. So if you want to recommend someone, recommend Dr. Metcalf. And another unbelievable coincidence, my son, who was going to school in Mount Royal, he went to Earl Grey, then He went to Rideau, and then he went to Western. He ended up dating Dr. Metcalf's daughter for a while. Of course, he was very young and had no idea that we had this connection, right? So I'm like, Metcalf, what's your old man doing? Oh, he's a doctor, I think. I think he's a urologist. I'm like, okay, how many Dr. Metcalfs are there in Calgary? That was pretty funny. And my son was, I think, greatly impacted by my situation. And he thought I was, not going to be his father much longer. So I had to spend a lot of time, and I would recommend, I'm sure you already have, to assure your children that you're going to be as good as you ever were and that you're going to make a full recovery, because they can express an anxiety, not necessarily directly to you, but through their actions. And if you're a loving parent, and I'm sure we all are, and you're observant about your children, you'll notice that there's something not quite right. And I detected that with my son. And so I went, I made a significant effort to speak to him and to assure him that I would be fine. Of course, hoping that I would be fine, not knowing either. And time passed. My son decided to go into a career in medicine. And he told me that my situation inspired him to do that. And I told him, well, good, now I got someone to look after me when I'm old, and don't charge me either. So he ended up going to taking a master's in health sciences at U of C, and then if I can brag a moment for him, because he is a great young man, he somehow got it into his head that he would apply for a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford. And I thought, wow, that's you're biting off a big mouthful there, son. Are you sure? Oh, yeah. He gets turned down. Well, they take 2 students from every province. And he was absolutely in deep remorse over this and crushed by it. I said, are you crazy? Like, that's the most prestigious university, one of the most prestigious in the world. And you're a long shot, because you have to not only be a strong academically, you have to be a good athlete. It turned out my kid was a very good basketball and volleyball player as well. At Rideau, they won the city championship 3 years in a row. They had a great coach. And then he went to Western and played for the Western team that won the provincial championship in volleyball and basketball. Actually, he was the only kid to make both teams in the whole school. And it's a fairly prominent school, and they recruit, even in high school, athletes to come to the school because they have a strong athletics program. Actually, the quarterback for Western High School in Calgary went to Western University, my alma mater, and drove the team to the Canadian National Championship. He's in his draft year. He's going to be drafted in the CFL. He's 6'5", and he can really throw the ball. So Western had an excellent sports program, but they brought in these students from Lethbridge and south of Okotoks, and I'm like there's a catchment area, a geographic area, and if you're in that area, then you can come to the school, and if you're outside, you have to apply because they have limited space, right? And you got to be bussed in from out of town or whatever. So I went with the basketball team once, and I'm like asking these kids, where are you from? They're all these big giant guys. Oh, Lethbridge. Oh, Okotoks. I'm like, was there anybody from Calgary? Anybody from the catchment area? They're like, I think your son's the only one. And it turns out he was the only kid who lived in the geographic region around Western to make the team. Everybody else got brought in, but I'm not complaining because they did very well. So to make a long story short, my son's all depressed. He couldn't get into Oxford. He's just kicking around the house. Oh, woe is me. What's going to happen to me? About a week after he gets the notice, sorry, son, you can't come, he gets another phone call from Oxford. They're like, we got this other scholarship. Would you be interested in that? So he goes and talks to his advisor at U of C and the dean of medicine. They're like, yeah, say yeah. And they said, well, we'll interview you on Skype. I thought, wow, that's a modern technology, right? You don't have to go fly over there and get subjugated to this, in-depth interview. So they set up the Skype interview, and the dean of medicine, they were listening to the questions, and then they would write an answer, and they would slip it to my son under the camera, and he'd be like, yes, and then and he'd look down, and then he'd give him this answer. So they said at the end of the interview, give excellent answers. We're quite sure that you have met our criteria. 4 or 5 days later, he got accepted, went to Oxford and took his PhD. And then he applied for medical school, and he did quite a few publications, and he has some proprietary research that he's developed, which, again, coincidentally, 6 degrees of separation. Now that I'm working for the Alberta Liberals, and Dr. David Swan, who's the MLA, he was quite a thorn in the side of the NDP and the PC government on healthcare issues. A, he's a doctor. B, he's got great contacts in the healthcare sector. And we just did a huge tap dance on the head of the Minister of Health when we discovered that the wait times for ER through ambulance service exceeded 1 hour. And we are arguably the wealthiest jurisdiction probably in North America because of our resource wealth. In England, where my son had gone to school, the National Health Service, basically England's poor, their health service isn't very good. The wait time there is 15 minutes. So we pursued the government on that. And I got my kid to give us all the research that we used to hammer the government with. I'm like, thank you very much. I knew all that money I sent you was going to pay off eventually. And we forced the government, believe it or not, to amend their ambulance service, paramedic and ER protocols, so that they would have 2 paramedics in the ER receiving the patients as they get dropped off, and then triaging them through to a bed. What they had been doing was force the ER team, 2 people, to stay with the patient in the hallway while you're waiting for a damn bed to get open. And that means they couldn't go back on the street if someone got shot to pick them up in downtown Calgary to take them to Foothills to the trauma surgical suite. And this crap had been going on for a very long time. There was, according to our stats, something like 650,000 hours of overtime for these people to sit and handhold the patients. Now, you have to do that in case they have a condition that could degenerate, and if they die in the hallway, you're in big trouble, and there's liability. But for minor cases, they had to sit with them, and it impacted the service levels of EMS in Calgary. And so I think that's one of the biggest accomplishments that we've had since I helped them with their communications and in the last term of the legislature. And that's why, as I mentioned to you at the beginning of my conversation, when the government and the UCP ganged up and decided to cut by 60% funding to the smaller parties and the independent MLAs, it makes you wonder the motivation behind that, because a one-man caucus like David Swan was extremely effective, and I'm speaking as an objective person now, in amending healthcare public policy in the province of Alberta. Just think what he would do if he had more money. He'd have more people like me working for him, I guess. Anyways, we just got through that today, so I'm a little bit pissed off about that, but I'll try to hold that back. So I don't want to go on here because I'm probably meandering. I am 67 though, Dave, so I'm starting to forget stuff, right? Okay. All I know is that I had a great doctor and he was a very skilled surgeon, and everything came back, thank God. And I had great people to help me along the way, people that I'm forever indebted to. I hope I've made some contribution back to the community by speaking here and by my documentary and by counseling men who come up to me, and I'm sure men have come up to you. And I would encourage you to be open and honest with them, and always remind people to be tested. And I'm more gratified when someone comes up to me and says, because of you, I went and got tested. I'm like, and don't ever remember on your birthday every year, don't let that slip. So whether it was Jim or Brett Wilson or Brett Hart or Dr. Donnelly, there's a lot of great people that are working in this particular field of healthcare, and I hope it continues. I hope that the next government, hint, it's not going to be the same as this government, decides not to fulfill its proposition to savagely cut spending on social programs, because probably prostate health care for sure will be top of the list. Education, some other social programs. We just gave a speech on dementia, and they're quite stressed because they don't have enough resources to deal with a growing demographic. I mean, we're all going to be there one day, and I told them, I don't want to be in a senior's home eating cat food because I don't like the taste of cat food. So another reason why you need an effective opposition, that's my political pitch for anybody that might want to vote Liberal. I'll just say that the person who is running to succeed Dr. Swan, his name is David Kahn. He's an Indigenous rights lawyer. I work very closely with him. He'll be running in Calgary Mountain View. If you live there, if you've got relatives, that riding has been Liberal for 15 years consecutively since 2004, because we had a very legendary and dedicated MLA who gave so much to public service. We just had a retirement party for him on Saturday, and I don't know if any of you have ever met Dr. Swan. He's 6'5". He was actually a very good basketball player when he went to the University of Alberta in his day. Very generous, kind of a mild-mannered guy. And we're sitting there, toasting him, and he pulls out this guitar, and I'm like, what the hell is he doing? Like, what? He pulls out this guitar, and he plays one of the I'd say the most famous folk song in Canadian history, written by an Albertan, Four Strong Winds, Ian Tyson from High River, and he changed the words to reflect Liberal policies and, giving a shot to the UCP and Jason Kenney and Rachel Notley and the NDP, and it was extremely clever. And he could play and sing, and I'm like, Jesus, man, you got a second career. Like Ian Tyson, eat your heart out, right? So that was Dr. Swan. We wish him all the best. We hope David Kahn succeeds him as a Liberal MLA, and if he does, I'll be back at the legislature, and I'll come back to speak to you guys and regale you with the latest tales. By the way, the Ledge is going back into session, in case you're wondering when the election's going to be, on Monday, March the 18th. It goes for 4 days at a time. I'm only packing one shirt because I don't think we're going to stay past the throne speech, which is on the afternoon of that Monday, and that the Premier will be called upon by the Speaker, and she will drop the election writ, and the official campaign will kick off. So 28 days from there would put it to Monday, April the 15th. Don't go on holidays unless you want to vote in the advance poll, because you'll miss your opportunity. Perhaps Tuesday, April the 16th, if she waits to the next morning. So even though the campaign isn't declared, we have been running basically every day since around the middle of November, and you can tell by all the announcements and all the news releases that people like me are putting out there. I would be remiss if I never asked if anybody had any questions, because I've just droned on here, and Dave's already giving me the let's get going sign. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask me anything. I'll answer to the best of my ability. Yes, sir.
When you had your biopsy, what was your Gleason score at the time?
7. 7 or 9. I can't remember. Is that right?
Yeah, probably 3 plus 4 or
Yeah,
4
okay.
plus 3.
It was, okay. I'm forced to remember. You think those numbers, you remember your social insurance number. I vowed I'd never forget my numbers. Because, you see guys at Prostate, they're like, hey, I'm a 7, what are you? They're not talking about how many wives they have, I don't think, right? No, okay. So I do recall that Dr. Donnelly told me that I was in the middle to lower threshold of the range, which I thought would exclude me from the operation. But he said, yeah, it would if you were 65, but you're 49. Sorry, you now are in the red zone to be safe, because if you come back to me in a year and you're at 12, I don't know if the cancer cell will metastasize or one isolated cell breaks off and flows through my blood system and ends up in my brain, whatever, because I was unaware, and he could only guesstimate how long I had had it. It had been at least a couple of years. It grows in its infancy and starts to expand. So I do recall, I thought it was 6 or 9. I think it's 6. And despite that low number, he insisted that I take prostatectomy. So I left it to the expert. And I don't know, I don't want to express anything for you that might make you think, I'm a 6, I'm okay. Those are judgments that I don't ever want to have to make in my life again. And I would recommend everybody act out of extreme caution and not take any risks or any chances with your life, or you'll end up like Vic Rogers, or that naturopath that lived in my neighborhood, and there's no turning back from that. It's final. Anybody else?
Just, I'm guessing the fellow that did your biopsy was Dr. David Weissman.
Yes, Dr.
And,
Weissman.
we've been trying to get him to come and speak to us. He's, I don't know if he's coming with spanner and biopsies, but if we could get him out. So I don't know if you've got any contacts with
Yeah, I haven't seen him since I got
Since you
it,
had your
but
biopsy, okay.
he's got a great sense of humor.
The
And
other thing about your talk about Western Canada, and you'll forgive me for this, but I went to school there as a student, and I also finished my teaching at Western Canada High School.
excellent.
And
When's the last year you were there?
97.
Oh,
I retired in 97.
did you know
But,
Bill Ring, the principal?
Fred Ring.
Fred Ring.
Yeah, I knew him. I knew Fred 40 years before that. But anyway, your point about them having students come from Okotoks and High River and south of that. I did a stint as assistant principal, and we'd be in the office in August, and I get phone calls from Halifax, wanting their children to come to Western. I've been out of touch now for 20 years, so I'm not sure if it still has that reputation, but
It does, and this quarterback quarterbacked the high school team, took the University of Western Ontario to the national championship, and they got beat, unfortunately. Yeah. But
the other thing I wonder about is what happened to the fellow down in Phoenix or down in Arizona, the surgeon that you were going to...
So by the time I got out of surgery and was able to walk again, which was a while, I unfortunately had to break the news to him that no, he would not be in the documentary, and thank you very much, but I've already gotten a treatment, and hoping that I would make a full recovery, but his practice flourished, I think, and a lot of people who went to him, go out of perhaps with best intentions. I don't know if the science or the medicine is that precise, but I think a lot of them go and accept that option because they're afraid. Mm-hmm. They're afraid of losing their sexual function or of the incontinence implications. But you roll the dice, and I just didn't feel lucky. I wanted to take the surefire, the golden treatment, as Dr. Donnelly described it, even though it was, kind of crude back then, but it's the fail-safe.
Yes. Well, Gary, let me thank you on behalf of the group here.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your candor and your presentation.